Most ethical dilemmas involve a conflict between the needs of the part and the needs of the whole, the individual agent against the organisation, or the organisation against society as a whole. For example, should a company install mandatory alcohol and drug testing for employees, which might benefit the organisation as a whole, but reduce the individual freedom of employees? Or should products that fail to make tough safety standards be exported to other countries where government standards are lower, benefiting the company, but being potentially harmful to world citizens? Sometimes ethical decisions entail a conflict between two groups. Managers faced with these kinds of tough ethical choices often benefit from a normative strategy. One based on norms and values can be used to guide their decision-making. Normative ethics uses several approaches to describe values for guiding ethical decision-making. 5 approaches that are relevant to managers are the utilitarian approach, individualism approach, the moral rights approach, justice approach, and the practical approach. The utilitarian approach, espoused by 19th century philosopher Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, holds that moral behaviour produces the greatest good for the greatest number. Under this approach, a decision maker is expected to consider the effects of such decision alternatives on all parties and select the one that optimises the benefits for the greatest number of people. The individualism approach contends that acts are moral when they promote the individual's best long-term interests. In theory, with everyone pursuing self-direction, the greater good is ultimately served because people learn to accommodate each other in their own long-term interests. Individualism is believed to lead to honesty and integrity because that is what works best for everyone in the long run. The moral rights approach asserts that human beings have fundamental rights and liberties that cannot be taken away by an individual's decision. Thus, an ethically correct decision is one that best maintains the rights of those affected by it. To make ethical decisions, managers need to avoid interfering with the fundamental rights of others, such as the right to privacy, the right to free consent, or the right to freedom of speech. The justice approach holds that moral decisions must be based on the standards of equity, fairness, and impartiality. 3 types of justice are of concern to managers. Distributive justice requires that different treatment of people is not based on arbitrary characteristics. Procedural justice requires that rules be administered fairly and rules should be clearly stated and consistently impartially enforced. And retributive justice argues that individuals should be compensated for the cost of their injuries by the party responsible. Finally, there's the practical approach. The practical approach sidesteps debates about what is right or just and instead bases decisions on prevailing standards of the profession and larger society, taking the interests of all stakeholders into account with the practical approach. A decision would be considered ethical if it is one that would be considered acceptable by the professional community, one that the manager would not hesitate to publicise on the evening news, and one that a person would typically feel comfortable explaining to family and friends.